Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven, and today we are revisiting Destiny v Magic, which is maybe a bit of a simplistic title because we'll be talking about a lot of things that Destiny could or might do, some responses maybe from Magic and kind of looking at that dichotomy, and then even introducing Keyforge to the scenario. So if it's your first or your 89th time listening,
Episode 89.
we're glad you're here. Stay tuned. All right, we are here. Welcome, everyone. As we said, we're glad you're here, and especially if you're joining us for the second time round the table on this particular topic. First time, Robert was subbed in to bring his operational expertise, I think, to the argument slash discussion.
He also has a much stronger history with Magic
Yes.
than either of us do.
Very true.
He grew up playing Magic, and so that was another, I think, helpful insight on,
My
on
experience,
the first episode.
my experience with Magic was I drank a lot of coffee today, and I'm trying to keep it under control. And I also had that hot and ready, and
Man,
I got to tell you,
caffeine plus hot and ready is just an explosion waiting to happen.
Yes, in so many ways, Zach, you're correct. My experience with Magic.
Sorry, I'm going to need to calm down off that joke.
My experience with Magic was going on eBay and buying a ton of cards that nobody wanted for like $5 when I was like small, like 13, 14, when eBay was still like a roll of the dice. And getting,
Yeah, it was questionable for a
getting like
while.
just a box of trash cards, putting decks together with my friend Josh that were just probably horrible, and then playing. And it was a huge amount of fun, but we never got into like actually buying product, keeping up with things, going to tournaments, participating at all. So that's what I know about Magic. And then I've, of course, learned if you're going to be doing anything in this industry, I think you need to learn more and more about Magic and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And the traditional torchbearers of the profit in this industry. And so I've done a little bit of that, not the least of which is finding out that, yesterday, or 2 days ago, the MSRP, or maybe it was a little longer ago, of Magic is no longer a thing.
Yeah, they are canning it. It's not canned yet.
Yeah.
But you asked a really, I think, important question, and like you said earlier, so we did a whole episode on this before, which we kind of set the stage, can Destiny beat Magic? And then asked the question, really, what would any game have to do in order to beat Magic, and why is Magic such a titan of the industry, right? So if you're wanting all those details, there's a whole episode on that. I think it'll be linked to in the description. But you asked a question earlier in response to the MSRP thing with Magic, which is just like, what's the point of MSRP?
I was going to ask that same question. You know, why? So I'm thinking about it in my brain, which is where a lot of my thinking happens.
You're on fire today.
Thank you.
It's all that coffee and that hot and ready.
I think so.
Here it is.
It's the most potent comedic duo that ever existed. MSRP has never been a thing that anybody is bound by or even uses. I mean, even like looking at it for everything that we sell, it's like if MSRP went away tomorrow, I'm not sure anything changes for retailers because everybody's always willing to sell for a lower price. So the market does what it's already doing, which is essentially bottoms out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a group of, just in the world we're living in today, and I would have to do way more research into when MSRP started coming around and how they were implemented and stuff. I know that there was a time period where, and now it's price fixing, where like someone making a good can't sell it and also tell you what you have to sell it at. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole bunch of law in relation to that. They can say, here's what we suggest. It isn't, and as far as I'm aware, MSRP was originally adopted, and there may be legal precedents and then going away from it or going to it or whatever. But essentially here's what we as the maker expect this to be valued at. And so, if you go into a retailer and it has a little MSRP on the product, $20, and they're, Barnes & Noble's trying to sell the book for $50, you at least know that you're paying more than what the manufacturer expected you to pay for it.
And I also have to imagine, and there's some people listening that know exactly the answer to these questions, so we're sorry for speculating rather than spending all the time it would take to really sort this out, but it definitely seems like if I'm looking at the old distribution model of goods in general, so like let's go back to like the I don't know, in my head it's the 50s or
Okay.
the 40s. And let's say you own a store that's selling washing machines, and you have a bunch of different brands that are distributing throughout the country to all of these different small stores in various towns and cities across the nation. And if Whirlpool wants to do a big push to get their machines in people's homes, they might want to say, we want you to sell our products at a price that's going to beat our competitors, because that's going to be good for our brand. So we want all of these machines in those customers' homes. And so it's a way for them to actually compete on price by instructing essentially the people selling their goods what they should be selling them for. And then it might also be to prevent, random retailer out here is trying to sell this vacuum for $2,000 and in the MSRP is $200, and somebody who buys that feels like they got a raw deal from the manufacturer of the vacuum rather than the retailer.
Well, and I think a lot of the pricing law it comes less from, that kind of thing, which is just consumer protection, and way more from like industry protection in terms of like, I'm trying to think of there's a term where people in the industry get together. It's like everyone that sells games, that publishes games, could get together and say, hey, we're all going to universally up our price.
I know what you're talking about.
It happens in oil. Is a big concern.
Surprise.
Oh, I forget the term.
It probably happens.
Not collusion.
It is, but it's kind of like collusion. It's like price collusion or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But a lot of the pricing stuff comes from that, because also like if they could dictate what you sell it for, right? They could say, hey Steven, you're buying the washing machines. You have to sell them at $500, and then they could go to Walmart, and Walmart could say, well, we aren't going to sell it unless we can sell it for $350. And then all of a sudden, Walmart can sell it for $350, but you're stuck selling it at $500.
Yeah.
And they can effectively choose winners and losers. And it gets in this. It's very sticky. And then it's like when you break that price, like there's a lot of law involved there. So obviously, it is way cleaner. And this is what you were saying earlier in Magic, at least getting kind of back to tabletop. In Magic, I was shocked I happened to be looking on Friday. It's been a while. My niece is into Pokemon. And so I was into Pokemon when I was like 10, played for several years, and then kind of just started playing other games, right? And so now I'm kind of revisiting Pokemon. Like she's excited and she's buying it. It was her birthday recently. So I stopped at a local store and bought some packs at full MSRP, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Everything I thought is a
lie.
Well,
the set came out on a Friday. Her birthday was on a Saturday. And so it was the kind of thing where like...
You were getting value from immediately accessible goods.
That was exactly it. But it got me wondering. It was like, because we haven't ever sold Magic or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! So I was like, I'm just curious. Like, I just want to look at this and see how it's working out there. And our store, even locally, we don't sell that stuff. So we're built very differently than a lot of stores are built. But anyways, I looked and I was shocked because it was like online, the latest set of Pokemon. I think MSRP, which is at least for Magic is going to go away, was like $145.
How many packs?
36 at $4 a pack.
Okay.
I think it's like 140 something, 48 maybe. But the literal the price being charged online was, from what I can tell, because we order from distributors and you can see the prices, and I know the more you order something at certain distributors, you get better discounts and stuff. But from what I can tell on Magic and Pokemon, it was literally like a handful of dollars. Like we're talking $2, $3, or $4 of gross profit for selling it, and gross doesn't account for anything besides the cost of the actual good.
So not involving the labor to ship it or the unpacking of the boxes, all that kind of
And I had recently been to another local store, and they were selling packs at MSRP. Their boxes were at MSRP, and I was just like in my head, I'm just thinking like, how is this working? How does this even? I don't know. I don't know how it works.
Well, that's why you hear but this is the quintessential friction with the support the FLGS argument, right? Because when there's that much of a disparity, when it's like what, $90 versus $140
difference, it's literally a $50 swing. And if you're in Pokemon, I think it has 4 sets a year. So technically, if you were buying a box of each set, you're looking at $200 or $300 a year, which is a lot to ask, just for the product.
Yeah. But so here's the thing, though. So we've talked about this before. There's always people willing to lose money on sales, right? I mean, out there in the world.
So you see this a lot, especially in tabletop. Tabletop's an industry that a lot of people love. and a lot of people want to be involved in terms of a store or online. Now online makes it even easier, but like there is usually someone
somewhere.
there is either a Amazon, as an example, and they're a specific someone who their whole flywheel thing, if you dig into how they work, is like they charge the least amount they can, sometimes losing money, to basically increase how much of it they're buying. And then when they're buying a lot, they can essentially pressure the producer / manufacturer to give them a better rate, which lets them lower the price, which means they sell more, which means that they can pressure the
Yeah, and eventually
thing.
they're the only game in town, right?
In the same way that you hear a lot of like stories from Walmart early on where like the gum maker, it's like they're saying, hey, you need to change your packaging this way. Our market research indicates we'd sell more of your gum if you did this. And the gum maker says no. And then Walmart says, all right, we're not going to sell your product anymore. And it's like, but they buy 98% of the product from that company. So the company has to do what they say.
Right.
So anyways, you have companies like that who are pushing prices down. And then you also have just newcomers who are willing to, even to get someone who doesn't sell any magic right now might walk in the door and be like, we'll make $1 a box just because we're making $0 a box right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're always willing to. It's the old dollar menu problem, right?
Race to the bottom, man.
So yeah, you've I think specifically studied this, but the dollar menu was devastating for most fast food restaurants, right?
And you see a lot of them getting away from it.
Yeah.
Like even I don't study McDonald's super heavily at this point.
You don't?
No, I don't like
I study a
frequent.
Big Mac every now and again.
I mean, I like McDonald's as much as the other billions of people served daily. I love. There's a comedian that was like saying, "All right, so you say you don't go to McDonald's, eh?" Their slogan is literally billions served daily. It's like, come on, we all know someone's going there, and it's not the same people every day. Anyways, but yeah, the dollar menu, it was essentially a race, right? And like what happens is like it starts out, it's like this great thing. I think it was Taco Bell that invented it.
Of course, the first person willing to like really go into the trenches gets an immediate benefit for a minute.
They do, and then it's like other dollar menus pop up, and now you're competing, and then it's like you're willing to make pennies or maybe a penny on each transaction. And at scale, like if you get enough people doing it, right? But then as other people start competing, it's like they start pushing it down, and then they have to start making burgers smaller, and they have to start cutting corners or getting supplies cheaper and stuff. And so like eventually though, it's like this isn't sustainable. Like
Right.
we can't keep doing this. So I saw at some point recently they had like the $1, $2, $3, and $4 menu items where there are a couple $1 items, but they're not what they used to be, right? Mm-hmm. I remember you could get a double cheeseburger for $1. When I was in high school, I remember we go after basketball games. It's like $2 for 2 double cheeseburgers, and it's like, I don't want to know how you're doing this.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah, we don't need to know for our own safety. So all that to say, it seems like the MSRP concept doesn't even really hold any particular value, because I'm wondering, the thing that's more valuable to me is MAP, right? That at least has a market impact in some way. MSRP doesn't, to me, seem to have any kind of impact, because there's always people willing to drive prices down. That's the direction prices go.
Yeah.
It's never like I'm getting hosed by somebody charging double MSRP. We have the internet now. We have online research. We have a number of stores competing in the same area. You're never going to get away with charging anything over MSRP, or even a lot of times on MSRP.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's interesting about the concept in general is like, one, MSRP is irrelevant because you don't have to charge it.
Yeah.
Most people don't charge it in some way or another. So, I mean, a lot of the local retail stores, I think, do charge MSRP on their products. But if they were charging a random price that wasn't MSRP, I think most customers would still just pay whatever the price was.
And they'd probably end up where they are now, even if there wasn't a guideline.
But, it's like then you have MAP, which in a lot of cases in the industry right now is 20% discount is the minimum advertised price. Mm-hmm. And MAP is even a very suspect legal concept that is very, I mean, it's just weird. I mean, it's a weird thing, right? But then at that point, it's like, well, what if MSRP was just MAP? Like, why do you have two numbers?
Right.
What do we...
If you could see, and that's the thing is, I know that it's illegal in a variety of ways, but if you were Wizards and you could say all boxes cost $99, no less than that, and you can sell them for more if you can, but you probably won't be able to because everyone's going to be selling for $99. Everybody who's selling these boxes is making a reasonable margin, somewhat happy. End of story. That is ultimately would be considered kind of anti-consumer. because prices across the board are going to be higher. You're not allowing people to go lower and lower and lower and make their $1 margin, because the people making the $1 margin are not making any money, but the consumer's super happy because it's the cheapest they've ever found this thing, right?
Well, and like, according to Amazon's P&L statement, they made $11 billion last year in profit. So like the problem here, and this is where tabletop gets very interesting to me, right? And it's the dance we've been dancing for months and months on the podcast, and we even talked about the retail. We had the retail episode recently. Same thing, which is the real problem here is that they're already doing it, right? They're not setting the price. MAP isn't setting the price technically. You aren't telling people you have to charge this. You're just saying if you charge below this, we're going to stop selling to you.
Yeah.
But the reality is that Magic boxes being $2 or $3 or $4 more online than the cost, they're setting the price no matter, like, that's the price.
Yeah.
Like, that's the bottom of the barrel. Like, it's going to be $1 to $3 each box is how much someone's willing to make to buy it from a distributor and ship it to a customer.
Yeah.
And the interesting part is that someone who's just buying it from a distributor and shipping it to a customer is not exactly necessarily doing much, right?
Yeah,
like,
certainly.
random online retailer who's selling these cheap boxes may really be adding almost no value. Like, they're not, what are they doing, right? Besides just literally taking a box and sending a box, kind of a thing. And so the problem comes in when, if you're a publisher or if you're any number of publishers and you think that all these thousands of retail stores, I'm most familiar with the US, so I'll use those numbers. I think there's somewhere around 4,000 US retailers. That's just from various ICVT reports and stuff. And so, like, if you think those 4,000 retailers are critical to the sales and success of your products, then you have to ask the question, right? Because, like, ultimately, a local store usually doesn't have scale. So even if you're talking a big community of people playing a game, maybe 100 players, I think that would be a pretty big community for most stores.
Huge.
For any game. And let's say the average person for Magic or Pokemon buys 2 boxes, which I think is maybe high, really, especially up front. So you're looking at 200 boxes a set, right? You can't run a store off of $3 on, even if you're so successful,
boxes,
right? 200 boxes. Like that math doesn't work out, right? And so the problem we keep running back into is that if what a local store is doing is actually valuable, the only way it's sustainable is if that gets paid for somehow. They either need to be able to sell products that they generate money off of, but the flip side of this, and this is, we always approach it as like a retailer. We're talking about, well, if we're doing these things that are very valuable to our local community, how do we actually economically and feasibly get people to buy into that, right? Or to pay for that instead of upcharging on the products, which is traditionally what was happening, right?
Right.
Which is like, you'll make all your margin on the products, and that'll support all these other weird activities you're doing to make these communities work and grow and get people involved in stuff. So kind of coming back around, though, is on some level, if publishers just started, as an example, and this is a weird future universe, right, asking the question where it's like, if publishers actually see value in that, right now they're compensating that value by discounting their product. But they could also just compensate that value straight up. And the retailers, maybe they aren't even retailers anymore, right?
Yeah,
maybe they don't even need to sell product.
Doesn't that ultimately look like, that would look to me like Wizards... I mean, the end game of that, sorry, a pen flew out of my hand. The end game of that is like Wizards starts just buying retail stores and making them Wizard stores. And then that's...
So that works as long as Wizards, I think, can pull it off. Because that works as long as the company has enough product that it makes sense. But where you get into this thing is where you have hundreds or thousands of publishers where, I'm thinking of various board game publishers or whatever. But even someone like Asmodee who owns FFG and a bunch of different people, it's like, do you have enough product to warrant a store for just your line of products?
Yeah.
Because the kind of in between of these 4,000 retailers who have a space where people come and play and they can teach players and all this kind of stuff is that, like, they're not having to do any of that, or manage any of that, or build any of that, or take any of that risk, right? Where it's like, technically, instead of giving a discount on Magic boxes, Wizards could say, hey, we're just going to pay you to host Magic stuff and build Magic community. and like you're going to report all the people that are there, all the players that are playing, and like we're going to essentially pay you per player, knowing that every player in the game is going to result in them making money.
Yeah.
Because the only person that guarantees they make money off of getting a new player into a game is the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Like, technically speaking, someone could come into our store right now, learn how to play a game, walk out, buy it on their phone somewhere, and it never actually generates any revenue for us.
Sure.
But like, I don't necessarily think it's 100% that publishers are going to have to pay for these places to exist. But the reality is, previously, they've been valuing the work of the retailers and the inventory risk and the et cetera, right, by providing a discount. And that is seemingly falling apart.
Mm-hmm. And that same discount is going to people who are not doing those things in many instances.
That's really
right?
it.
Like the online retailers, the big ones, the Amazons. I mean, like, I would bet Amazon's getting a better rate than any of the retail stores.
Well,
and what
even
they're
I think
doing is being
Wizards
Amazon.
is selling directly on Amazon.
Right. Which was a big move. I mean, that was a big deal.
This is the other reality, is that if Wizards sold directly for $99 a box, and that was the only place you could buy Magic, they would make a lot more money. And they would also make a lot more money than they're making by sending it down to distribution, down to the retailer. So then technically, if they just took the 30 extra bucks they were making and invested in their best community building, best stores, that could actually work out.
Right.
And they may be able to do that actually cheaper.
But that's where I come to that and say, like, how would you not just own the store?
Sure.
Like, eventually, if you're paying them $2,000, $3,000 a month, it's like, well, I can just buy this and do it myself.
That works. The risk is that, one bad Magic set, and all of a sudden you have 4 months of 4,000 stores that don't do well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Whereas a store that can have games from Wizards and Konami with Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and Asmodee and 500 other board game companies, all of a sudden you diversify that risk. It's the same reason that distributors had any value ever, is that you're going to warehouse my inventory for me. You're going to, even, talking with smaller publishers, you're going to buy a lot of my inventory. And then that way when retailers order, they can order 2 copies of my game in their, big order of all this stuff without having to order from me directly and from these. Because a lot of tabletop game stores, right? It's like we're a little different because we're focused on specific products. But maybe I'd be curious what the average number of publishers stocked by a retailer is at any moment.
Like the diversity
I
of
bet
publishers.
it's at least 50 to 100.
And that's, I mean, thinking about like Wizards selling direct or that kind of a situation, this is kind of gets back to, is there value in the local retailer? And if you mean that, what are you going to do about it? Because you would imagine, I think just general impression right now is, yes, you would make more money immediately, potentially, but would you eventually see the bottom fall out of that? Would you see the foundations crumble as less and less people are interested in buying it direct from Wizards because there's less players, because there's less community organized events happening? Or do you end up in a world where all the community organizing is still happening in places that are random? Is it happening in coffee shops and restaurants and people's houses?
Well, and my kind of point is like, as an example, things you could do, right, is with Magic in particular that we're on the topic, or even it would work for Destiny as well. If you have these community centers, it's really not a retail store anymore, right? Because the goods aren't necessarily moving. And there is value to these places having goods. Like I know Magic.
Like your Pokemon packs that you buy.
100%. And Magic they send free decks to retailers to give to new players. And so like starter products and the latest stuff. And like, because when people show up tonight for a Destiny League night, it's like, if a new person shows up and the only way to get it is to order it and get it 2 days later online, like that's obviously not as great as being able to get it. So there's still some retail happening. But the reality is that if they start selling direct, and with that extra money, a portion of that could go to, instead of saying, hey, buy 100 Magic boxes and hope that people are willing to pay 20% higher than they can pay online to move these boxes, to sell them. Instead, they could just say, we will pay you this much per player coming to your weekly Magic League night. Yeah. It's like they come, they register, they do their thing, and you will this is what we're going to do to facilitate people having somewhere to go, having events to go. And they could do event series, and you could charge to get into that as well.
And you could even have those retail stores warehouse the Magic boxes for you, essentially. 100%. And it's like, tell us how many you sell each week. We'll send that many as replacements, and you pay us for those boxes, basically. It's like...
Well, and that's where you get to, at least. I think there's if there's some weird evolved future to this, going this direction that we're talking about, and I think it's possible that it changes. Like it's the technology and just the world is changing. So that's another version of it that I think is completely viable, which is especially publishers that get big enough, right? Mm-hmm. Distributors are great for small publishers because they don't have warehouses. They aren't going to sell out. They aren't going to, retailers aren't going to order directly from them. But, something as big as Magic, most stores are ordering enough of it frequently enough that it could self-sustain. So in that case, another way of changing the curve, right, is like sell directly to the retailer and essentially cut out the middleman, right, cut the distributor. But again, that only works at massive scale.
And you could also, that's the thing, is you could not even sell to the retailer, but the retailer houses those goods, and then whatever they sell, they take that money in and they send it right to Wizards.
Yeah.
They don't ever make money on the product, but it's still immediately available.
Yeah, or they just get some portion of it as well. But, I mean, I think because the reality is that if there were 4,000 places, not even stores, places where there were active, thriving, healthy Magic communities, Wizards directly benefits from that.
Sure.
In a way that is impossible for a local retail store to capture, right? And so that's where it's like, instead of trying to fight it,
pay for it directly.
like just cut the corner, right?
Well, all of that to say, so these conversations,
we kind of just got off on the weeds.
Well,
there.
but it stems from this entire idea of how pricing is working in the industry, removing MSRP, and how that really doesn't seem like it's going to change anything. And then if we're considering Destiny and Magic and potentially Keyforge and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and all of these things, I mean, I don't see a future where this isn't eventually changing over time. Like you're going to have to adapt to this because it is not going to get more beneficial. It's not going to go backwards.
Yeah.
The chicken has flown the coop, as it were. It is outside. It is never coming back to roost.
Well, it reminds me of people, and I don't have any tangible examples at the moment, but you can't legal it in, right? Where it's like, if technically speaking, everyone that sold Magic agreed, we're not going to sell Magic boxes for less than 120. If everyone in the industry would do that, then the people selling the boxes would inherently make more money.
Yeah.
Right?
Assuming that consumers are willing to pay that price.
Yeah, well, assume that is the assumption, right?
Yeah.
That has to be there. So, but the reality is that like, even if they sell less boxes, now they're making more per box. And so my assumption is that supply demand would kind of work out in a way that like, this would happen. But obviously the moment, it's game theory, the moment one person's willing to go lower, it's a fight all the way to the bottom. And that's where we found it. But if everyone in the industry are willing to agree to that, but you can't legalize that.
Yeah.
It's price fixing. That's the problem, right? A publisher can't say you have to charge $4 a pack, you have to charge $148 a box.
Yeah.
So that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we have to realize the world we're living in, unless consumers just all of a sudden decided we're not going to buy the half-price boxes anymore, right? Mm-hmm. We're only going to buy from a local retail store. We're only going to buy at full MSRP, which is also, that's impossible. I mean, we see it with Amazon, right? It's a losing race.
I don't think that's a winning argument. The way that the world and economy is going, I don't think you're going to get that.
And I think that's where so much of the friction of buy local comes from, where it's like, I get the idea, and it's like you should be buying from where you want to exist to continue supporting this thing, which is where we eventually got to, well, what if stores could just charge directly for that thing instead of having to, because again, right now it's just kind of weird, right? Yeah. It's like, and it worked in the 90s when like that was the only way to get access to product. Mm-hmm. Like you couldn't go on Amazon or online retailer. And it's a real, I mean, that's the thing to me is like, either the store is unnecessary and publishers are not going to be willing to pay for it. Or the store is necessary, and I think you'll start seeing publishers actually paying for it. Conversely, either the store is adding value and the customer is willing to pay for that value, or the value they're adding is not real.
Yeah.
And so I think what's going to have to happen in the next 10 or 15 years, and I'm actually, hopefully we do a state of retail on the Gamma.
We should, yeah, we'll go to Gamma and talk about it.
We're going there about a month. We did a state of retail last year with Travis from New York and Patrick from Seattle. Or Washington State. So that was anyways, I would be curious to talk about some of the stuff with them because it's like, I do feel like the retail store in the next 10 years is going to have to prove its value. And if it can't, it's going to go away.
Yeah.
And the ones that can prove their value will stay.
Yeah.
Because I think customers and publishers There's a valuable thing there. And not every publisher can open up 4,000 stores.
Sure.
And in fact, I don't think any of them are in a position to actually do that.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to mention something that I find fascinating, which is that the volume play wasn't even possible a long time ago when this all kind of started, right? Now you have people who can actually exist making $2 a box because they're selling 16,000 of them online.
Yeah.
Right? Before that, maybe prices didn't go down so low because, nobody could make enough money to make that 100%. Worth their time. But now that somebody can, I feel like that's something that nobody's talked enough about that has flipped the table on traditional retail entirely. And it's what Amazon and others are doing more and more, and I just don't see that stopping.
Well, and
right? Volume is the new normal.
And I think that's just the reality of it, right? That's what Amazon's done to so many industries, where it's like maybe you bought at your local grocery store a pack of batteries for $5 before, and it's like, but now you literally have an online entity who can push that so low.
They can make a dime per sale
and
of
it's totally
batteries,
fine for them, right?
They love it.
And so the thing though about it is like, if you try to stop that. Like you can't stop it.
It's not. I don't think that is stopping. So we should just get rid of that notion entirely.
And then ask the question: what does the environment necessarily look like or need to look like? Because again, the flip side is like me buying my batteries from a local hardware store, or a local hardware store existing. I can buy most of that thing on this hardware store stuff online now, right? For a way cheaper price. And it's like I don't need a space to gather to do hardware, right? But like, if there is actually a need for the local retail store in a tabletop environment, that is the difference.
Yeah.
Where it's like, most things that you buy, you don't need other people to play with. You don't need space to play it. You don't need specific components to play the game, right? So like, that is the question mark, which is like, because what you don't want to happen is the inverse, which is like, you have the Amazon effect happen, and then all of a sudden, the industry crumbles on itself because...
Yeah. Which from what I understand kind of happened to comics in some ways. Fascinating stuff. Let's talk about this more proper Destiny v Magic, shall we? So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to address some questions. So these are responses to the last podcast, and we're going to essentially kind of revisit those responses and kind of talk through some of the ideas that the community out there, all of you, pitched in response to some things Destiny might do to what I would consider like get greater market share.
Sure.
Right? And to compete with the bigger games.
And that was essentially the question, which is, if you were in charge, what would you do with Destiny to start positioning it to eventually grow past the point where Magic's at in terms of players and success?
Well, let's kick it off with Jason Wiley. Shall we? You want me to read?
These are some epic comments.
I'll kick it off.
We'll go back and forth.
We should say first, too, that Saga Says, which is a product we make for Destiny, they are still on sale, and they're moving pretty quick. And we don't know the Convergence release date, and that could be any moment, actually, at this point.
Yeah.
So if you need the entire set, Saga Set is one of every legendary, two of every other card. Those are still available, and we don't know when those will no longer be available. So if you're a Destiny player and that is interesting to you, you can find those on our website, teamcovenant.com, brought to you by teamcovenant.com.
Us.
Use the hashtag AskCovenant to respond to questions that we ask or to ask us brand new questions. Jason Wiley did that, and his response to the first Destiny v Magic podcast is, if I were in charge of Destiny, I would hybridize the distribution model by creating starter sets that contain 2 of each normal starter cards, plus 2 of all other commons for the entire year of cards. Basically a quasi-LCG, but fully playable among friends. For the collectible component, leave the uncommons, rares, and legendaries in packs and sell those as boxes. Similar to how data packs worked for Netrunner, but maybe even stretch those out and group some of them based on themes or mechanics. That's the first thing. Second, I'd educate stores, if they ask for help, on how to grow a casual community and provide tools for the community players driven to organize to assist with those activities. I'd make regular game announcements and provide ongoing responses to weird gameplay questions versus waiting 6 months to provide rules updates that scratch the surface of those questions. Also, organized play doesn't have to equate to competitive play. Organized play is a generic term that indicates an organized effort to grow and curate a game. and essentially play it. I don't see what's happening. I don't see that happening well for Destiny, and some stores will figure out how to do it right. For instance, Jason mentions T3 Gaming and their themed tournaments. Others will not, and players will quit with little to no player bases to play in. One can give away Destiny decks just like you do in Keyforge. Destiny is still a great game. It just needs some love. Jeremy is an awesome designer, but he can't turn the whole game around with new mechanics. He needs the help. And if there's one thing that I have learned in this industry that I have changed my mind on from when I was younger to now, is that the success of a game is tied less to how good it is than I originally thought.
Yep.
The mechanics themselves, the experience of the game is not all that there is in this picture.
Well,
distribution, publishing, manufacturing,
I feel
retailers,
like it's an ingredient,
community tools, etc.
and I've seen bad design, bad development go very poorly for a game.
It will tank a game faster than it will make a game succeed, for sure.
That's the thing. To me, it's the ingredient that doesn't make it happen, but it can make it fail.
It's seasoning.
It's
literally,
it's 100%, yeah.
If it's not there, you know it. If it is there, you're like, okay, what does this taste like?
And if you go too far, it can be bad. I had the experience with that last night. Salt, literally salt. That's a different conversation. But the thing about that, I would say, is that it's the thing that, like, if you're not getting the other pieces right, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is unfortunate timing for Destiny, which is I feel like the first 3 sets were designed way early before much was known about the game. And then the design on set 4 and beyond got way better. Mm-hmm. And then now that there's a bunch of supply and the game's normaled out and stuff, all the other stuff has gone wrong, which is like, and it didn't go super right from the beginning in terms of distribution.
Boy, that's a nice way to say that, isn't it?
And stuff. But the reality of like just communication and delays and even right now convergence, originally they said Q1, we're almost to March and we have no idea what's going on. So there's a lot of layers there, but I will say, his basically 4 paragraphs are better starters, better organized play / educating stores, more organized play focused on non-competitive, and then free decks. And those are all actually 4 things I can get behind in some level. It's just hard, right? It's like if you included every common from a cycle in a starter or even a set, the price of those goes from $15 to $30 probably.
Easily,
very quickly. And then on the OP, it's like we've run into this problem again with stores where it's like the reality is Destiny's one game and it's only producing so much revenue for each store. So they're only going to put so much effort into this particular game. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it ends up being players.
Now, see, that's the thing. Jason, interestingly, is suggesting that you provide tools for the players themselves that are driven to organize and assist with those activities. So that becomes interesting where it's like, I'm a player who really loves Destiny and I want to see it thrive in my local community, and I go direct to FFG to get the tools that I need to do that. Maybe I have a tournament organizer or a player finder that I have access to. Maybe they will send me materials directly that I can use to incentivize tournament play and whatnot. But then you also, in that space, you have to ask the question again, well, if you're a player and you're driven to host Destiny tournaments or events, and you are given the tools to do so direct from the publisher, why are you doing it in a local store? Like,
are there no other spaces?
There's no incentive to do that. It may as well be at anywhere that is willing to host you and is a comfortable environment. Maybe you go to a bar, maybe you go to a pub, maybe you go to a coffee shop. So local stores would start to get a little antsy, I think, about that. It's like, are you outsourcing? And then it's like, well, you didn't want it anyway. And then it's like, well, maybe I kind of do.
Maybe now I do.
It's kind of a fascinating thing, but that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that they have done with Champions. I don't know if you saw that or not, but basically by being, they had the 2 classifications of community builders that you could apply for. I forget the names of them. But they actually had points for hosting events and et cetera, and then there's prizes you can cash those points in for and stuff. So it's not Destiny, but it's someone doing something on that.
And most retail stores would probably not mind people being in the store if they didn't have to do anything, right? It's kind of the old school mentality.
I mean, that's a lot of stores do that for sure.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Jason, for the suggestions there. Question number 2, Zach, you want to cover that? Wizard that climbs the library, long-time commenter.
And this is less a question and more just a list of things that they would do, which is a lot, right? How I would modify Destiny, remove the lottery. This is an outdated motto which only appeals to old guys with disposable income.
So make it non-collectible.
Do you want to address these one at a time, or do you want to at the end?
We can do them at the end.
All right.
There's a lot of these.
Make Destiny as easy and cheap as possible. I mean, that's always the case. I'm just going to check that one off. But at some point, it's...
I mean, you would imagine that that is currently being done. So as possible is an interesting qualifier. What does as possible mean? Is it literally the giant spectrum of anything, or is it within a means of profit and revenue that is feasible?
Makes sense,
right?
yeah.
Because like cheapest as possible is free.
Sure. Or no, pay me $10
Yeah.
to take this deck off your hands.
So you could give out Destiny products to everyone for free.
Yeah.
That is as easy as possible, but I don't know
that's
how
not sustainable. You would
unless you're charging for other things.
secure the Star Wars license to promise permanence. I feel like if that were possible, that would already be done. But
Lucas would never.
possible yet.
Disney is never going to do that.
Create cooperative and competitive versions using the same cards. That's interesting. We'll come back to that in a second. I'll star that one. Rotation doesn't exist, and you can always use any old decks and cards. Completely generalize Star Wars, remove all or many of the known characters and focus on a narrative built by your own cards, which makes you feel like a unique entity, but still within the Star Wars universe.
I mean, that's interesting to me. That really is interesting to me.
Kind of like in an Arkham sort of way.
Yeah.
It's like you have a character that you're building, and instead of you're being Darth Vader. But
Yeah, but even the idea, see, in Arkham, there are known personalities, right? Like Ginny Barnes has been through various Arkham games, and you kind of know. But I think the thought here is like the heroes are whatever gets created during the game itself. Rather than bringing in a Han Solo, you bring in your smuggler card, and then various things happen throughout the game, and you end up with an experience that said, oh, look at how heroic this smuggler was.
Sure.
Maybe you name it, you put it on the wall, and that's your new Star Wars hero, right?
yeah, and I kind of get that, but I also feel like the most iconic thing about Star Wars are the characters. And
Yeah.
like to leave that on the chopping
Very
room
hard
floor
sell.
is like difficult. Same here. I think it's the same challenge. Theme, huge swaths of the population will never touch sci-fi for theme reasons. Keep things like Endor and Dagobah alive, but insert emotion and betrayal as card effects or resources. Stop focusing on death. I do like the idea of games that aren't centered around killing things,
Yeah.
just in general.
Keyforge does a good job of that, right?
Yep, and Star Wars could technically be that. You could have objectives instead of trying to like knock someone out.
Emotion and betrayal as ideas.
Like turning someone to the dark side could be a goal instead
Yeah.
of like killing them, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Where was I at here? Okay, I would remove all modern Star Wars references. Destiny is tied to modern Star Wars, which limits it further than just being just Star Wars. If they only focused on classic Star Wars, that would help. Even then, Star Wars is only for a certain kind of person. The modern Star Wars stuff has killed off a lot of the old fan base. Nostalgia is how these movies thrive. So I actually like what they're doing here, which is they're doing a mix. It's prequels, it's sequels, it's originals, it's comics, it's all the above. And then finally, from the wizard that climbs the library, create digital version to play on smartphones, creating a voting system to influence future sets.
So some fascinating things about these suggestions. You're never going to secure the Star Wars license if you're cutting the characters. Period.
Yeah.
If you're removing all modern Star Wars references, you're never getting that license either. So I don't think those are even possible for Destiny. That is absolutely in the terms of that license. You have to use, you see a new movie comes out, you're going to see those cards in the game. You're going to see those toys on the
New
shelves.
TV show. And
This is the Disney machine.
Yeah.
So that's necessary.
I do, although it was rough for Imperial Assault, the idea of having a co-op and a competitive version of the game using the same cards, if you can pull that off, I don't see why you wouldn't. It's the same reason I don't know why there isn't a multiplayer, like popular version of this game. You just get more mileage out of the same cards, and you can appeal to different kinds of people.
Yeah.
So, even if they put out occasionally every quarter or so, and again, this is asking them to do more for Destiny, right, which is hard. But these are cool things they could do, which is like putting out a scenario box set where you build a deck and you have a character, and it's like you're playing through a story instead of playing against each other, kind of a thing. And whatever the case may be.
And that's one place where you can start to crack into either a Magic player base or a player base that doesn't exist for either, which is we're looking to have a group experience where we're essentially adventuring together in the Star Wars universe. And that's something that certainly is a unique selling proposition for a game like Destiny.
Well, and that's what
if you can pull it off.
I don't know if someone else is going to mention this or not, but one thing I harp on all the time are the starters, and that's where I feel like the starters need to be actual decks, and they need to be very cool characters, and they need to be like, if you could buy a 15, that's why I love the Throne starter decks as well, but if you can buy a $15, $20, $25 deck and immediately start playing against people and be on a similar level in terms of just the deck itself, I think that does a lot of work for the game. And flip side, if you do have a campaign cooperative thing going on, it's like that's also a great place to start, which is like you have this deck, etc.
I could really see that cooperative thing working, actually.
I don't think they'll do it. I would love for them to do it, but I don't think they will. But a cooperative style LCG for Star Wars in the vein of like Arkham Horror, and I would go with a different system completely. I don't know that I would I wouldn't bring the dice from Destiny. That's a catastrophe. But I think that would go over so well. It's unbelievable. And they originally were going to do the LCG.
I know,
as a
yeah.
cooperative.
You can imagine though, if you had your Destiny cards and you could buy a scenario pack that was like, blowing up the Death Star or something.
Yep.
And it could be very simple, right? Where it's like, you still have your 5 cards, you still have everything, you roll your dice out, and then you flip encounter cards like you would in Arkham, and maybe it says remove all ranged dice. And it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then you got to decide on my turn, am I going to re-roll or am I going to contribute to the mission? And I've got to do so much damage over time. I mean, there's a lot of good opportunities to.
Yeah, I don't think it's that hard. Right, you have like a deck, and it's got characters and upgrades, and it's like if a gun flips, right? It's like it just goes onto a stormtrooper or something, and they have health, and you can knock them out. And you have Vader show up, and it's whatever. You figure it out.
I'd say of all the things that FFG is capable of doing, designing a system that works in that way is one of their greatest skill sets. I think the design engine is pretty strong, and I think it could happen for sure. Okay, moving on to, thank you for that, Wizard Climbs the Library. That's a lot of suggestions. What do you think about removing the lottery, the collectible aspect?
I mean, I'm not more or less attracted to it based on being collectible. I'm fine with collectible. Collectible means they get to put a lot more cards out every year, and I like having a lot of cards and a lot of different decks that I can build. But if they're going to not collectible, I would rather see them go the Keyforge route, which is either unique decks or pre-constructed decks. Like, if every month we were just getting 2 new decks, and there was a format that was literally just play the decks as they're built, and then there was the other main format being mix and match anything from any decks that you own, kind of a thing, I would be just fine with that. I think a lot more people would do that, that version of Destiny than the collectible, but I'm not sure that it's a viable game if that's how they're selling it.
All right. Moving on, Anesthesia Cat. Good to hear from you, as always. Regarding growing Destiny, give starter packs out for free at Star Wars movie opening nights and at Star Wars conventions. The first taste is free. This is consistently, I think, good idea. I know that if I were anywhere between the ages of 7 and probably, now, and I got a free Star Wars deck whenever I went to a movie opening for Star Wars. And I'd never seen the game before, and I didn't know anything about it. And it came with a little, little handout, and maybe it gave me a website to go to for more information. The chances of me going from not playing or understanding or knowing about this game to maybe playing it are tremendously high. What that ultimately takes to do in terms of the logistics involved, I don't know, but I know that things like this have happened before.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I was a kid, I went to Pokemon a couple times to get the promo card you got for going.
Yeah, right.
So it was like
Burger
a
King a
card
lot, too.
instead of a deck. Because like obviously, if they're having to charge $15 for an incomplete deck, I assume they'd have to charge $20 or $25 for a complete deck, which means, I mean, their cost has got to be
It's a big marketing
significant
expense, yeah.
So like, I don't know how many you can give out. You'd have to. It would be a test where it's like, because I know obviously there's a certain percentage of those people actually becoming players of the game that would make it worth it. I don't know what that number is.
Yeah.
But that's a huge risk.
I'm not even sure that the local play environment is ready with the net to catch all of those people.
Sure.
Right? I wonder. It'd have to be a big effort.
But like going into episode 9, it's like having a front back Kylo Ray cardboard that you only get for seeing the movie on the opening weekend. It's like
learn more at Star Wars Destiny.
Yeah, but even then, let's say you print like 200,000 cards. It's like, and they cost 10 cents each. It's like that's still a $20,000 expense. That's a lot. Well, but I would go see the movie.
That's a pretty small. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's not terrible.
Yeah. All right, you ready for the next one? That's another long question.
Landon from TCG Rollout. What up, Landon?
Landon Dastrup, he says, to answer the question, I'd make better introduction products and slow down the introduction of new mechanics. The intro of new products are released at the start of a cycle, which means all the cards in those sets are going to be easier to understand, but less important near the end of the cycle. Is it worth it to buy the Luke Han starter right now? Was it ever? Even the Ray Kylo starter has dropped in relevance. A 2-player starter once a year is fine, but the single deck starter should be coming out every set and should be full and complete decks. Now, and that's, I would even say, not even every set. It's like every set you have a couple starters that trail it, where it's like, why have everything happen at once? You already have a whole set. There's enough hype there.
You have enough excitement
it's like
there.
A month
Let's keep
later,
it going.
here's some new cards and a new deck if you want to buy it. A month later, here's some new cards and a new deck if you want to buy it. Anyways, Pokemon Magic both have starters releasing with every set, and that's because they don't want players to feel behind. If someone started playing Destiny today, where do they start? I would have to recommend skipping the starters and going straight into packs unless they specifically want Boba Fett. Number 2, we got so many mechanics in the second cycle after just learning the game and the game breaking in the first cycle that it started to feel like a lot. I kind of gave it a pass since I had heard all the problems with the first cycle, figuring these new things were to fix certain issues. Now we have third cycle coming out, still trying to figure out negative plots, how far power actions might go, what cool things we can do with indirect damage, and now I have to worry about mods, downgrades, etc. Let's slow down and explore these newer mechanics more before moving on to the next hotness. I still feel like there's a lot more that can be done with the mechanics we have had, but we are adding more, and it is really starting to bloat the sets. It feels like we need a certain number of cards of each mechanic in a set that is becoming less and less design space within the sets. It's overwhelming. Let's slow down. Now, the trouble with this is that as someone who has played incessantly since the beginning, I don't feel like they've been coming out that fast at all. Like I don't feel overwhelmed by it, and I understand people that do. But the balance of this is that your most frequent users of the game, players of the game, right? They have to remain engaged. Or
do you think it's new mechanics though?
No, I don't think it's
that's
new
the
mechanics.
false premise that I think so many designers fall into, or even publishers fall into, is like, we need something crazy and exciting and off the wall to like keep people engaged. And it's like, no, you just need interesting and usable cards and characters.
Well,
and they can all have the same
mechanics,
die sides and the same text, the same types of text. You don't need all of that mechanical change. You just need to use the tools that you have. Honestly, a great example of this, actually maybe a bad one, but to me a great example of this is the Arkham system in general. Matt, who's the designer, Matt Newman, isn't introducing a bunch of these new mechanics and keywords all the time. It's using the same mechanics in weirder and new ways, right?
Sure.
Where it's like, we're not introducing a new concept besides Doom, we're just now placing Doom tokens here instead of here, and that's having a new impact. I feel like Destiny could do the same thing, right?
Well, I feel like when I look at what they've introduced, though, like even a power action, it's like this is an action that they are limiting to once.
Which usually they would have to write in the action
limit
itself.
once per round or whatever.
That's
So
a fair
it's
change.
just
That's a good upgrade.
Or like in this set, right? It's like downgrades is a thing, and it's like, well, these are upgrades you put on your opponent's characters. So like, you didn't really introduce. It's not like you introduced a new card type or you introduced a new.
That's fair.
It's like that kind of a thing.
That's reasonable.
And another big thing they're doing this cycle is tribal, which is like subtypes. And it's like they started doing this kind of in set 4. You started seeing Sith and Jedi, and that's allowing them to make cards like, even the original Mind Trick, it's like a spotted blue character. Technically, that means that all your blue characters have to be Force users for that card to thematically make sense.
Right.
Like otherwise, you got a problem. And there's plenty of characters that I think fit in the blue area that don't have any business mind tricking. So that's the thing I like seeing, where it's like, okay, well, and the other thing that Tribal does, and I like that Jeremy said this on our podcast a few weeks ago, is that if you're a new player, you can play to that, where it's like, okay, get all the Ewok cards in your deck, and it's like, and it's going to do Ewok-y things, and it's going to like function on some level. It may not be the best choices, but like putting a Jedi deck together is probably not going to be awful kind of a situation. But it is a fine balance. I don't think new mechanics are where it's at. That's not. I rarely get excited because I'm trying to think of a Destiny new mechanic that I was like, that's the thing I really want. Even mods. He mentioned mods. Essentially, these are upgrades on supports. So it's like, again, you're not really introducing anything.
I think you've made that point pretty well, actually. I agree. I've changed my view.
I'm 180% behind the starter push.
Yeah, this nonsense with the 24 cards or whatever is 100% wrong. I think objectively, without self-evidently wrong. Just Incorrect.
Well, and I think if the problem is the cost based on the number, I don't think cards are the problem. I think it's dice. So like the idea of not having 2 elite characters in your start is crazy to me. So then it's like make an awesome character that does like the original Palpatine that only needed 2 dice anyway. Or now we have plots, right? It's like you could easily have a plot that's like action, exhaust this plot, roll a Darth Vader die in. And it's like Darth Vader's your character. And it's like that's an 8-point plot.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it makes it feel like a standard, it keeps that deck up with the standard deck, even though you only maybe have 8 dice in the little starter deck or whatever.
Or just have a lot of events. Just stuff that doesn't need dice. That's an exciting starter game if it's like there are 5 upgrades in each of our decks.
Sure.
And then the rest is just fast playing events and trying to sneak around. It's good. Moving on to Map P. By the time Magic had widespread distribution, it already had competition from the likes of Decipher and others, which I remember very fondly. Magic didn't get to grow in a vacuum and had to compete against games with strong IPs. It won out because it was the better game, period. Gamers are gamers, and Magic was beaten by online video games, the next big thing, which started to be played in the late 90s. The big online game that beat everything was, of course, World of Warcraft, which I know all too well. Hearthstone was just an extension of WoW, and with so many Magic players also playing WoW, Hearthstone's success was obvious. Despite there always being the next WoW killer, nothing beat WoW, it just slowly burned itself out. A lot has been said about smartphone gaming, but I can't say what is a big phone app game on the scale of Magic or WoW. That space is just so crowded. I do believe the next big thing in gaming and what will grow the gaming community is game stores becoming a service-based industry and embracing gamer cafe model and figuring that model out. They have to walk away from the retail model, focus on making money by selling coffee. Starbucks does very well for itself, but also selling gaming experience and hosting gaming tables.
I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I sure do too. Thinking that something will beat Magic when it has had so many good games go against it over the years is kind of foolish. There isn't a game mechanic or pretty art or even new manufacturing technology that will beat Magic. Now, I would say, right off the bat, I'll continue this in just a second.
Yeah, I'm making notes.
There is 100% a reasonable degree of the Star Wars IP is much stronger than Magic. Down the line. No doubt in my mind. So it is not unreasonable to think that a game with a strong IP like Star Wars, the strongest potentially in the world, could come in and do it. I think it's possible that it could do it. Maybe not Destiny, but Star Wars itself could. Magic sucks the life out of other games simply because games need a sizable community to keep them going and wallets are only so deep. So the key is to grow the community overall, and that comes from changing how gamers come together in person. The current game store model has gone as far as it will go, and the next innovation in gaming will be how people come together to play games, and that is at the store level. I would say that is at the local level. And I definitely do not disagree with that at all.
Yeah.
I feel like, I think we both feel like, everyone here feels like that is one of the key innovations that's going to happen in the next decade, and someone's going to get it right.
I agree.
I don't think it's coffee.
I was going to say, back to the coffee Starbucks line. I mean, I get it, but just from what I've seen, it's like trying to be a coffee shop or a cafe or a restaurant and also a game environment, even a services-based game environment. It presents so many problems, it's unreal. And what I feel like it ultimately ends up being is like a game store that serves a couple things, or a restaurant that just has games around.
It's a board game wall,
but
yeah.
Part of the problem, and I've seen this at a few different stores, where it's like naturally restaurants want to turn people. Even Starbucks, right? They don't want. It's a little different. Coffee shops, people come and hang out and have space for that. But like the faster they turn and burn and get people in and get people out and going through the drive-thru and stuff, that's how they win. But like, with a game store, it's like, well, you sit down for a quick game of Twilight Imperium, and you can't have a table taken up by 5 people for 6 hours and ever make that work unless you're charging for it. And then the question is, are you really willing to pay for a single table and space to play Twilight Imperium, or are you just going to own Twilight Imperium and take people to your house?
Right.
So a lot of problems there.
And let's not forget that the restaurant business as a whole is thought to be the least lucrative and most competitive business on earth. Everybody who owns or runs a restaurant says, for the love of God, nobody do this.
Yeah.
This is the worst possible thing you can do.
Unless if people are passionate about it and enjoy it, do their thing. But like, it's not like outside of like McDonald's, which really made its money on the back of real estate.
That's true. Yeah.
like, anyways, go ahead.
But that, so you have that, and you're combining it with a business that everybody who's in the business of games says, if you want to make money, don't come here.
Yeah.
There is no money to be made here. So why would you ever think that pairing those two things together would yield something like lucrative and great? It's like running a restaurant without the gaming component is already the hardest thing you can possibly do.
Yeah.
Now we're going to try to also attract a new crowd and figure out how to get them here for 5 hours and make that profitable for us and run tournaments and run events and host this. And it's like, I just don't see that as the way forward.
Well, and the same problem presents itself with coffee, which is obviously Starbucks is Starbucks, right? But that's like comparing all restaurants to McDonald's. Like there's gets to be a Starbucks.
Yeah.
But even on the local coffee shop level, which isn't easy, the problem with coffee is that, again, if someone's sitting there for 5 hours playing a game, how many coffees are they going to have?
One.
And on top of that,
it's always one.
At least the games we're selling and we're talking about, it's like it doesn't work either way, right? There's our version, which is like we're open. Our store in the week doesn't open until 5 p.m. and it's evening. And it's most people that come here, have daytime jobs and stuff. And so, like, how many people order coffee at 6 p.m.?
If I order coffee at 6 p.m., I won't go to sleep.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The other side is that Magic Yu-Gi-Oh! Pokemon has a huge part of their audience in the 13 to 18-year-old range. How many of those people are buying coffee?
Hopefully none.
So, like, a board game cafe that sells coffee, ultimately, best times for you are, like, brunch and, like, Saturday morning, right? But, like, who's walking into a board game cafe at 12 p.m. on a Tuesday to, like...
And are you going to be capable of beating the best coffee shops nearby? Like, if somebody's interested in having coffee, then are you going to buy the $20,000 espresso machine to make your game store work? These are the questions. It's like, it seems like that is a way to go. But in the end, all that you're really looking at is coffee shops or restaurants that are trying to compete by having some board game element in some capacity.
Yeah.
But it does not look like the support you're seeing out of a local store right now.
Sure.
It would be nothing like that.
And then on the second half of this, there's definitely this is an interesting comment because there's a whole lot I agree with, and then there's some that like the coffee thing I don't. But the second part, asking, let me find the line. He's basically saying that there's been so many good games that came up against Magic. To think something's going to beat it is foolish, and I think that's wrong. I think a lot of times the problem isn't the game. We said that earlier, right? Yeah, there are a lot of great games that came out, but like making a great game and being successful with a game are two polar opposite things.
Entirely different.
So like even Destiny, it's like I think if the launch instead of booster boxes had been 4 starter decks. This is what you get to play with. There's no customization, no whatever. And they printed 10 times more of that than they even thought about printing of the first set of the game. It could have had a chance. But, again, it didn't start out that way, right? It's like they did booster boxes. They ran out of supply. There was no easy way to get product, let alone a starter to get in. But if there had been starter, like if the first set had come out 6 months later, after there had been starters, and it's like, well, you can at least buy a starter and play.
Yeah.
And you're on the same level as anybody that got 5 booster boxes of Awakenings. Anyways, but what I do think, and this kind of pivots to the next thing, and we may do a whole episode about this soon, but something like Keyforge is, when we talked about Magic on the podcast last time, Can Destiny Beat Magic? It is the kind of innovation in a game that I think is required for something in a physical tabletop gaming environment to beat Magic, which is they came in and it wasn't, the design of the game isn't, it's good and it's fun. And it reminds me a lot of an evolved Magic, is how it feels. It's like, it's the same design.
You'd expect that from Garfield,
20 years later, but the reality is, like, it changed the way you buy, and it is now changing, even the organized play is changing the way you approach this game. And that is the kind of thing, because they have lowered literally all these answers about Destiny, right, with starters involved. It is $10 to start playing Keyforge, and you're on the same level anybody's at. And that's going to be the case in 5 years. No game can say that.
Yeah.
And so that is the thing that I think is game-changing, and we've talked about it before, but it's like when the average person has 40 or 50 decks, a friend gets interested, it's like it's really easy for me to hand you 2 decks and just give them to you because I've bought 10 or 15 or 20 of each set. So I still do think, like he was saying, the online beat, WoW beat, and then you had Hearthstone. Is it Hearth? It's Hearth. I said it right.
Hearth or Hearth.
Hearthstone.
Just depends on what you think.
I still do think in the physical realm, there is going to be a game that comes along, and I also think that not only will it come along and someday Magic may be already like it's to me it feels like a house of cards waiting to just be tipped over.
And isn't this exact sentence like the kind of thing that's just waiting to be proven wrong? Thinking that something will beat Magic when it has had so many good games go against Magic over the years is kind of foolish. Mep, I'm going to challenge you on that. That you could say that about everything that eventually failed. Everything that got beat, that was the sentiment, right? It's like nobody could ever think about, like this vacuum maker getting beat. There's been a ton of great vacuums and they keep being the best. And it's like wrecked. Whether it's Apple, whether it's
look at Ford. We
Amazon.
talked about a lot of stuff previously. It's like even Amazon. It's like most companies go away.
Right. Look at Airbnb. It's like nobody can beat Hilton. They've got the best. They've been doing this for hundreds of years.
They totally changed the paradigm. So
some different perspectives on that. But thank you, Mep, so much for that comment. There's just some really great thoughts, and I hadn't fully kind of appreciated that you could put this kind of experience in a bigger box, which includes online games and basically say gamers are going to go to the most entertaining game type experience, even if it's cards or dice or online or the next thing.
Sure.
So that could be the case.
One note too there before we get to the last question or answer is I also think I don't want to lose it. Did I lose it?
You think Nick Allen on question number 6?
No.
Hashtag Ask Covenant?
It was in regards to, we'll go to the next one. I'll think about it.
It's like talking to my grandma. Hashtag Ask Covenant. Honestly, I don't think Destiny can ever surpass Magic. You got the cardigan and everything.
Yeah, I know.
It's just an easy button.
I'll just cry in the corner.
Hashtag Ask Covenant. Nick Allen. Honestly, I don't think Destiny can ever surpass Magic. I don't think a game based on another company's IP can surpass a game where the company controls the IP. Now, that's fair. That's a fair consideration. Magic has worked itself into this incredibly strong position where the lore of the game and the game itself work in tandem. The lore of Magic tells a story, and the card sets help drive that story and lets players interact with that story as it's being told. It's an incredibly powerful marketing tool that I don't think Destiny, which is using pieces from a story that's already been told and is currently being told, can truly compete with. To answer the question directly, the first thing I would do is up communication. What do you think about that?
Yes.
There should be consistent weekly communication about the game in order to help players stay engaged. Going dark for 3 months hurts the game so much, and I am sure Destiny is still recovering from that 3-month absence. It's 100% true. Of all the things that have been suggested across this entire cast, this particular podcast, this particular episode of the podcast, The Last Destiny Magic, it's the lowest hanging fruit on earth for FFG to fix. All you got to do is type. I mean, it doesn't take much. You can do it with the staff that you have.
They are doing this better. Like they started streaming.
That is better.
And they seem to be communicating slightly more. Whoops, pen drop. But the reality of I've said this 100 times on the podcast at this point. Maybe not 100. We only had 89 episodes. Is if they just posted once a week a new spoiler from the next set of Destiny. Like, hey, it's spoiler Saturday. Here's your new Destiny card. Get excited. Even if it took them 6 months between sets, like it did between Legacies and Way of the Force, you're still only talking 24 cards. They previewed yesterday on their 2-starter, they live streamed this past week, the 2-starter decks from the coming set. It was like 40 new cards.
Yeah.
In a single stream.
It's like a year's worth of previews.
That's crazy town. And I'm down with it. People are hyped, right? People are very excited about it right now. But they could literally, if all they did was that. The other thing, I agree with this 1,000,000,000%, by the way. If they just start talking.
I can't tell.
I think, the first company in the space that is willing to be truly upfront, transparent, and communicative with its player base, and has a good enough game and is popular enough to scale. Like, there are a lot of elements, but this is kind of like a can sink you ingredient as well, one of the spices. Mm-hmm. We'll start calling them the game spices.
Yeah. We'll come up with a recipe.
Yeah, so it's one of the things that can sink you, but it's like, if they would just say right now, as an example, 6 months ago, it's like, hey, I know there's been a lot of delays, but like right now we're expecting Convergence to come out January, February. It's like that's when we're expecting it, but things can change, so we'll be in touch. We get to January, and they know, it's looking like March now at this point. It's like, if they're going to hit the Q1 thing that they said. They said Q1. That's what they were willing to say.
Yeah.
But then it's like, oh, hey, there were some issues. Here's some preview cards from the coming set. We're really excited about it still, but it's going to be not until March. And then if we get to March, and then they're like, hey, something went wrong. It's going to be delayed. And, pick a month, May. It doesn't matter. If they just talk about it, it would feel so much less bad.
Yeah.
Then like in between set 4 and 5, there was 5.5 months with very little communication, whatever. In between 5 and 6, there was 3 months with almost no communication.
Even just saying we don't know. Even just saying
It's
we don't have
fine.
the information. Maybe it's on a boat somewhere in the middle of the Pacific.
We don't have the information, and we're trying as hard as we can to get this out as soon as possible. So we will let you know as soon as it's here.
Yeah.
And there's issues with like the thing with Destiny is that it's Lucasfilm. So who knows what they even have to get thumbs ups on to post. But yeah, I mean, the communication would be, that's why I'm excited to see the stream, is that if they're streaming twice a week, which is what their schedule is currently, you would think it would be hard for them to go a month without talking about Destiny.
You'd think.
That's just me.
Second, and this is more FFG as a whole, FFG needs to stop killing their own games. That's a good place to start, I guess. FFG has this nasty habit of killing their own games by releasing new games with similar models that divide communities. Many players of the old game go to the new hotness, and eventually one or both communities die off because of that split. The business model creates a serious lack of confidence in any FFG releases. They should do more work to grow the games they have rather than constantly trying to put out new games if they want them to have lasting success. That's fair. I think that was more relevant with the LCGs. I don't see a direct competitor to Destiny that's been released from FFG. Maybe you could call Keyforge that. But to your point on Keyforge, since we're let's wrap this thing up. We've been in here for a little while.
By the way, I have one more thought for Destiny.
Yeah, tell me.
And then I want to pivot to Keyforge.
Yeah.
Don't lose whatever you were thinking.
I won't.
I think, and I don't think I mentioned this on the episode with Robert, but I think that the number one thing they could do is stop investing in particular IPs and start investing in systems. So what I mean by that is, we've talked about this for a bit, but like with Destiny, it's literally like Star Wars version of like Street Fighter on a table, right? And so then immediately it's like, how in the world is there not a 2-player starter for Thrones, 2-player starter for Lord of the Rings, using the exact same system, where you can play Aragorn versus Darth Vader, and it's because they're just fighting each other.
Yeah.
And every game has its own unique, some unique mechanic or symbol or something that makes it Lord of the Ringsy or Thrones. But it's like, and you could even do like a booster box set of Thrones, Battle of Ruby Forward booster box, sell it. If it sells well, make another set.
Yeah.
Once a year, once is every.
I've been so into that for so long.
Like
have
you
your
just cross
5
those bridges
keystone systems. One of them is based on Arkham. One of them is based on Destiny. One of them is based on a Throne style. Actually, one of them could be based on Conquest, which I thought was a really cool system, where you have locations in the middle and you're deploying things to different ones. You could put that. So let's do a little.
That's what I mean by systems, though, right?
Let's do a little test case, shall we? Imagine the Arkham system, where you bring a singular hero, you put cards in your deck, you upgrade them over time, and you go through
work for all those
adventure
IPs we
together.
just listed?
Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones,
Star
Wars, continue. I mean, what game couldn't you do
Android?
that for?
Even
Android?
in their own universe,
of
Android?
Of course, you put the Android stuff. What about Conquest? Okay, you have locations in the middle, and you deploy troops to them, or you deploy things where you're defending.
That's so built for Star Wars,
Could it
by
be
the way.
planets in Star Wars? Could it be different locations in Lord of the Rings? Could it be different cities in Android?
In Thrones, it's just the different cities and battles, right? Like, yeah. So
It gets me worked.
that's where, like, all of a sudden, if I can play, Star Wars deck, and you can show up and have Lord of the Rings or Thrones or Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or insert any universe where people fight here, literally any of them, right? Get superheroes and get out.
Get in there.
Like the moment it's like, okay, I'm going to throw, here's Captain America and a shield, it's over. Anyways, but I think that is the kind of thing that if you also retool a lot of other stuff, but like if the starters are good and playable, the number of people you can get into the system that I know that really like Batman and would get in on Batman because Batman's their thing, and then like, oh, well, I also like Star Wars, and there's 10 people that play here that play Star Wars.
And I already know how to play the game, Zach.
And I already know how to play the game.
I already know how to play the game.
Yeah, so that's just me.
I already know how to play it.
I think that's the one. That's what I mean, though, by like, we have never seen a game. Like, imagine if Magic as a system had 15 different IPs that you could port into it. Mm-hmm. And I could show up and play, you have your Magic deck, I have my Star Wars deck, and we just get to play against each other. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that is so much cooler and wider, because it links to the biggest thing I think a game's going to have to do to beat Magic, which is they're going to have to get a whole lot of people involved in this kind of a game that have never been in this kind of game.
Yeah.
And that's where Thrones and Lord of the Rings and Marvel.
They've got the IPs.
That's the thing. They have the licenses. So like, is it literally just like a cross of a?
They've got Thrones, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars right now, right? Mm-hmm. That's I mean, anyway, and the worst part is learning a new system of any game. Yeah. That's the most annoying part. It's like I could learn the Arkham system 20 years ago and play it in 1,000 different settings and never leave.
Well, and then what also happens is that if you have all those IPs, right, you could go from, like with Destiny, 3 sets a year. I'd probably peel back to 1 or 2. And it's like, this is your, every 6 months you get a big Star Wars set. Mm-hmm. And then it's like 2 months later you get a Lord of the Rings set. 2 months later you get a Throne set.
Yeah.
And it's like you're exploring different veins of theme in each of those.
Yeah. Keyforge, heaven forbid. You can put anything in Keyforge.
Well, that's the same thing, right? It's like, I don't know why any deck building game doesn't start as Keyforge. Even if you have open constructed, it doesn't matter.
I mean, think about that in Thrones.
I know. It's
Change Amber, make it power. You know, sometimes you're off questing for power, sometimes you're fighting the mountain.
No, it's like completely right. And then you have your houses, right? It's like, this is a Targaryen, Martell, Greyjoy deck. And this is it's like, anyways. That's just, you know, I would love to see Thrones in a, it's so good for Keyforge, it's unbelievable.
All of these IPs will work in every capacity. Just stop designing new games. Free. You can have that one.
You can have that one. Do it. Please do it if you're listening. Okay, you were going to pivot into Keyforge
let's get out of here. We don't have time to pivot anything. It's been like 3 hours. What would you like to, sorry, I just started reading with no context whatsoever.
The real question is...
I'm reading the end of the episode question. Can you just...
We always ask a question at the end. We get your comments, and like we did today, we discussed a bunch of the answers here. So Keyforge specifically. So last time it was, can Destiny beat Magic? And now the question is really, can Keyforge surpass Magic? And more importantly, if it's going to, what's going to have to happen?
And really, isn't this question, is the unique deck game going to surpass the collectible card game, just like World of Warcraft, according to Map, past Magic? Is it the new way to play a game?
Yes, except for...
You can't answer the question. This is for the audience.
No,
so
yes,
that's
what we're
listening.
asking. No, that's what we're asking, but that's a yes-no question, which is not that... Those aren't great comments. It's like, yes, I think it is. So the question is, what's Keyforge going to have to do to be that? That's really it, right? What's it going to have to do for the unique game to surpass the collectible card game?
Yeah. Good question, Zach. Thank you. All of us here at Covenant, we appreciate you listening. Thank you so much for being here. And if you've made it this far, which is well over an hour now, we truly do appreciate that, and we hope that you find value in what we do. Until next time, keep playing.